Vampires used to be horrifying, bloodthirsty monsters, but somewhere along the way, they turned into brooding pretty boys that stalk schoolgirls. Well, V-Rising says no to all of that nonsense. Here, you are a proper vampire, a true villain. You burn in sunlight, you eat people, and you even put pineapple on your pizza. But being the bad guy does come with some great perks. You get a cool coffin to sleep in, a pile of magical weapons, and even a swarm of, interns to do all of your busy work. And why would you want to do any of this? Well, for revenge, of course. Eons ago, the dirty peasants tore you apart, destroyed your castle, and peed on your carpet. And now that you're finally awake, it is prime time to send them the cleaning bill. Well, as soon as you're done making a brand new castle anyway. And maybe a new workshop, since you could use a few new weapons. And since you're already doing that, why not a little garden? I mean, nobody has ever overdosed on healing potions. By that point, you're probably going to be close to making iron weapons, and those are a lot better than your crappy copper ones. So maybe revenge can wait just a little bit longer. Now repeat that loop for about 30 hours and you have an exact description of my past week. I had so many things I needed to do, and instead I spent that time chasing old ladies across town so that I can steal their yarn. And you know what? No regrets. I look fabulous. This cycle of madness starts off nice and simple. You pick a plot of land to build your castle, and then you realize that you need a lot more stone than you could have ever imagined. So how do you solve this problem? Well, much like in real life, you head over to the nearby mine, whip out your favorite pair of revolvers, and then blast those rocks like they owe you money. Just make sure you don't hit the wrong ones, because sometimes the rocks wake up, and they are seldom happy to discuss your innovative new alarm system. But surely you cannot just shoot your way through all of your problems. And that is correct, because V-Rising also lets you stab, slice, maim, bash, whip, or even bear down on your enemies. And if that's not enough, there's also 6 schools of magic, so you can introduce some medieval schlub to the wonders of electricity. Yet despite the many ways to torment the local peasantry, managing all of this is surprisingly simple, since you only ever have to worry about 6 abilities at a time, 2 from your weapon and 4 from your spell tree. Now you might be worried that such a tiny moveset would make the combat boring, but honestly that couldn't be further from the truth. Each ability is very fun to use and distinct from the rest, so mixing and matching them feels great. Even if you're in a group of free gunslingers, everyone can still feel distinct. All of that power does come at a price though. You might look like a badass Van Helsing cosplayer, but that armor is essentially made out of low-grade, one-ply toilet paper. The kind that pretty much disintegrates the moment a droplet of water comes into contact. So if you get slapped, even once, by a peasant that spent all of his money on steroids instead of soap, your face will look like the surface of the moon. Instead, I would recommend dodging and parrying, or simply mastering the ancient, mystical arts of getting the hell out of there. Every single attack thrown your way is avoidable, and I do mean every single one. The only catch is that your defensive abilities have cooldowns, so it is not as simple as playing DDR and mashing the right button at the right time. You actually have to pay attention to what the enemies are doing, learn their patterns, and then use the right counter at the right time. It is a very hard thing to do, and I'm gonna be real with you, I had my face used as a floor mop more times than I can count. But learning each unique boss fight is a very satisfying process. That cycle of being pathetic, then learning and improving, and finally sucking out the boss's blood through their posterior is beyond addicting. And it is one of the main reasons why I've gotten so into V-Rising over this past week. This game really is something special. Unsurprisingly, as a vampire, blood is everything. It's your food, it's your source of power, you can use it to decorate your house, you brew potions with it, and it's also a great source of entertainment as you get to stalk villages and judge people based on just how terrible their blood really is. Now you can chow down on rats or random bandits to keep yourself alive, but it's kind of like having a diet made exclusively out of gum you found at the bottom of a desk. A true connoisseur needs to seek out a fine vintage. Besides having a bit more flavor than just poverty and regret, higher quality blood also gives you additional powers based on who you snacked on. If you eat steroid McMuscles, you'll be a lot better at swinging a giant hammer. Whereas if you eat a miner, and that is with an E, you'll be able to shoot rocks with even more gusto to get even more shinies out of them. And you'll definitely want those because V-Rising is actually one big ruse. You get suckered in thinking it's going to be a fast-paced action game with vampires, when in reality it's actually a castle building simulator. You might think that's a joke, and obviously it is, but also not really. It all starts off very innocently. You'll need to build a couple of rooms to house your ever-growing assortment of crafting tables. A sawmill to get planks, a grinder to produce stone bricks, and a workbench to combine everything into useful items like weapons and armor. As you progress, you'll get more and more complicated recipes, but it's never overwhelming since you're mostly working with the same few ingredients. I mean, sure, the blood gets bloodier and the planks need a bit of extra work to make them plankier, but once you have a basic idea of how the crafting works, it is fairly easy to stay in the loop. However, all of those items require bulky crafting stations that will very quickly fill up your crypt with all sorts of junk. So sooner or later, you're going to need to move to somewhere bigger and better. But unlike real life, where such a thing might as well be a fleeting dream, the world of V-Rising is so infested with unnatural horrors that you can get some prime real estate on the cheap. All you have to do is very politely ask the previous inhabitants to leave and voila, you have a brand new base. Suddenly, you don't need to have a decrepit crafting shack stuck in a random corner, or a garden that consists of 4 plants you slammed into the ground and then just kind of forgot about. With a bigger location, you can actually let your creations breathe, let each area have its own personality. And soon enough, you'll find yourself obsessing about minute decorations because building stuff in V-Rising is just so easy. So easy, in fact, that you really don't have an excuse for an ugly base. And that right there is the insidious part. You'll start the evening by building a jeweler's section because you want to add some extra effects onto your spells. And before you know it, you've redecorated the central maze, added a new servant's quarters, and it's 4 AM and you need to get ready for work soon. You remember how back in the late 2000s, the internet was ablaze with arguments about who's better, vampires or werewolves? Well, V-Rising answers that question with another question. Why not both? So not only are you a blood-sucking monster, but you can also shapeshift into all sorts of forms. Everything from a sneaky rat to a how do you do fellow humans sort of disguise. While I was initially excited to see just how these forms would shake up the gameplay, they mostly ended up being quality of life perks you can toggle on and off whenever you need them. They're handy, but I cannot help but feel cheated I couldn't give bosses a bare-fisted beatdown. Which brings me to what is probably my only serious complaint about V-Rising. You are really slow. Now I get it. You've spent who knows how many years stuck in a coffin. Your legs are probably made entirely out of cramps. But even so, crisscrossing the map is a needlessly tedious process, even once you politely borrow a horse that somehow controls like an old Resident Evil character. There are teleport gates all over the place to give you the illusion that you can zip around the map, but you cannot teleport while carrying anything of real value. So you're mostly going to roleplay the Fellowship of the Ring and go on cross-country hiking expeditions whenever you leave the base. But, much like the Lord of the Rings movies, there is a lot of beauty to be found in the journey. V-Rising's art style might be technically simple, but it is full of little details and personality that give it a lot of charm. You might not appreciate this as the third group of vampires slams into your backside, but the visuals give the game a very nice and cozy vibe, which in hindsight is one of the main reasons I ended up spending so much time in my base, and definitely not the horde of succubi I picked up along the way. So, 3 years down the line, does V-Rising still hold up? And the answer is, unsurprisingly, yeah, absolutely. I've spent over 30 hours playing it this past week, both solo and with a couple of friends, and I really did have a blast. So if you're into survival crafting games and you don't mind losing entire weeks playing Vampire Barbie and building very, very fancy castles, then I can very easily recommend it. Double that recommendation if you've got friends to dive in with you, because let me tell you, there is nothing funnier than watching 3 grown men argue about horse naming conventions. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, a like and a subscribe would mean a lot to me, and I do hope to see you again soon. Bye bye!